Hello, and welcome to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. This is your host for today, Kate Carter.
I'm Kylie Colwell.
And I'm Holly Spear.
And honestly, we're just going to jump right into today. I just emailed the girls the PowerPoint for today, and I wanted to give a surprise to this episode. And I want to see what you guys' reaction is to the PowerPoint that you're getting. So go ahead and open it.
I can't open it.
I opened it and I'm already scared.
Stop. Don't tell me. I want to open it. Oh, I can't do it. Girl.
I know. What
are you doing?
So we're just going to dig right into it. I'm not going to say
crazy
anything.
hoe.
We're going to go. Listeners, welcome to one of my favorite, I don't even know, I don't want to say it without saying it. So welcome to one of my favorite stories. Quote, how very much I've tried my best to give you all a good life. But in spite of all of my trying, a handful of people with their lives have made our lives impossible. There's no way to detach ourselves from what's happened here today. End quote. Those are the words of Reverend Jim Jones, the leader of the People's Temple, in a tape recorded and recovered at the Jonestown compound located in Guyana. This tape was recorded at 5 p.m. on November 18th, 1970, as Jim Jones spoke in front of his over 1,000 followers. At a nearby airfield in Guyana, 5 people, including a U.S. congressman, was just murdered by the temple's Red Brigade security squad. Jones continues by saying the following, quote, my opinion is that you be kind to children, you be kind to seniors, and you take this potion like they used to take it in ancient Greece, and you step over quietly because we're not committing suicide. This is a revolutionary act. There's no way that we can survive, none of us. And if you have a dissenting opinion, please speak now, end quote. So everyone, this is the episode of Jim Jones, the leader of the People's Temple, and the story of the Jonestown Massacre.
I know this one like the back of my hand, but that quote gave me the heebie-jeebies.
I have this quote twice in the story, and I literally just gave myself goosebumps. Oh, okay. Wow. You guys know this story. This is huge. All of our listeners, if you don't know what Jonestown is, I don't even know where you're listening to this podcast. Jonestown,
if you don't, you do.
Jonestown is the cult of cults. It is the deaths of all deaths. It is the mass suicide that happened in the 70s. And we're just going to jump in. We're going to get into it. I want to tell you all about little Jim Jones, and his weird and interesting life. So you guys know this story, so jump in whenever you want to. If I'm missing any info, say something, because this is a hard story to put into. This is hard to talk about. It's a lot of stuff. So by the end of that November 18th day, over 918 people at the People's Temple were dead. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about the People's Temple and what led up to that November day. It was in Jonestown, Guyana, South America, and at Jim Jones's command, his followers drank a cyanide-laced flavored aid in coordination of a mass suicide, and then Jones shot himself. But of course, that's not the entire story of the Jonestown Massacre. So let's start off by talking about Jim Jones. I'm going to dig a little bit into his background and history because, as usual, it's very important to understand who he was as a person, where he was in life, and how he ended up ruling the People's Temple. So Jim Jones was born James Warren Jones in Crete, Indiana, May 13th, 1931. His father's name was Jim Jones Sr. and his mother, Lynetta. Lynetta was 15 years younger than Jim Jones Sr., and she actually carried the whole family. This is something that I found really interesting. So their whole dynamic in the family, I mean, I hate to say it, but these kind of cases, we almost always see some type of weird child abuse or horrible background in their childhood. And in particular with his mom ran the whole family. She was the youngest in the family. She ran it all. She did all the jobs. The dad was a deadbeat. So shocking. Jim Jones Sr., he was injured in World War I, and so he wasn't able to do much. He wasn't able to work. He didn't take care of the family. And on top of that, Lynetta never actually wanted to become a mother. So having Jim Jones Jr. was an oopsies, which is never a good sign. So not only was Lynetta working multiple jobs to keep up with the house and the family, but she was feeding them, doing the dirty work, but now she's also caring full time for a baby. As I know personally, it's a lot. It's a lot to handle. Can't imagine having the deadbeat dad who also is physically and verbally abusive. Right after Jim Jones Jr. was born, his dad actually ended up having a mental breakdown, and this led to their family eventually getting evicted from their home. The Jones family became homeless, but they were quickly taken in by some local relatives in another small town in Indiana called Lynn. Lynn was this very conservative town. It was tiny, and the majority of townspeople were avid churchgoers. Just side note, Lynn was like a hub for the Ku Klux Klan. So I mean, just a little side note. So I wouldn't say this town really sounds like a lot of fun, like really church going people also involved with the KKK in the middle of Indiana. Woohoo. Love that for him. So poor Jim. So to make things worse, the Jones family also lived in a rundown shack. It didn't have plumbing. It didn't have any of the luxurities. So Jim really did grow up in poor conditions. And then when he was around 6 years old, his mom took on a new job at this local factory, but she worked at night. So it allowed Jim to have freedom before and after school. So instead of going home after school, he was able to like be free and go out and around town. Of course, he didn't want to go home to be with his crazy dad. Jim was known to have a creative mind from a young age, but he really struggled to make friends and was known to be socially awkward. In his free time, he would, other than riding his bike around town, he was an avid book reader. But get this, he particularly read books and had interests in Stalin, in Gandhi, in Hitler, all the great names. So one thing to take away from the books he read is that he liked to read about leaders who had these big followings, and he would actually make pros and cons lists of strengths and weaknesses of these leaders, which like at a young age should just, I'm going to go ahead and say red flags, maybe not red flags, maybe like a orange, something's not right. Something's not right. No.
Someone's studying up.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also like
Bizarre.
There's no way I was reading freaking Nancy Drew, if you gave me a book about like Stalin, I'd be like, why? I don't want to read this.
No.
So as I said, other than reading, Jim often rode his bike around town. He would stop and talk to people as he passed by. And so everybody kind of knew who he was. And on a weekly basis, he would see this group of older ladies, and those ladies one day brought Jim with them to church. The ladies would say like, oh, we feel bad. Like this kid's just out doing his own thing. So we're going to bring him to church because, that's better than him just being on the streets on his own, which I get. So they brought him to this church. It's called the First Church of the Nazarene. And this is when Jim really decided that he was going to grab onto religion. In fact, when he was a child, he ended up alone attending 25 different churches during his childhood. And to me, I'm like, what? Like, I think I was a part of like 2 churches growing up. And that was 2 churches too many. Not because he didn't, wow, my family's going to hate me saying that. Not because he didn't like the other churches. It's because he thought of church as a sense of family. And so since he wasn't getting that at home, anytime he would join a new church, all these people would be like, look, this child, let's love him. Let's give him a home here. And so he loved that aspect of it. He hated being home with his father. His mom was always working. So if he wasn't in school, Jim was bouncing around to churches. Jim ended up being really enthralled about pastors at these churches. He saw a lot of similarities between the books that he read and the pastors preaching to the followers of the church. But unfortunately, all of Jim's love for the church led him to being picked on in school. I mean, the kid was in elementary school or middle school, obsessing over religion, talking about life and death. So obviously the kids around him picked on him for that. And he ended up not having many friends, or any, to be honest. So some of these students later on said that another weird thing that Jim did is, which you guys are going to get red flags for this because we hear this all the time in our stories, is Jim liked to hold funerals for dead animals. So he would find dead animals on his way home from school, and he would literally pick up like roadkill, bring it home, and have funerals in his backyard for these animals.
Oh, Jim.
But I will say he wasn't killing them.
I don't think that's a red flag. I think that's sweet. And my parents have stopped me from doing that a million times as a child.
Okay, I also kind of understand maybe if he's so religious, maybe he's feeling like that is kind of something that they need to move on.
Okay. Okay. I get
You
what
know
you're
I'm
saying. If he was killing them, you know what? I take that back. From what we've seen in other stories, people were killing the animals. He
Yeah.
was just having funerals for them. But if you're in
Um,
middle school and you're telling me that you're picking up roadkill and burying them and saying a full like mass funeral for them, I'd be like, yeah, cool,
okay, but like
Holly.
looking back on it, we know who he is now. So it's so hard to retrospectively like look back and be like, oh, he's weird. Because like maybe that's not so weird. Maybe he's sweet.
That's one of his good things that comes out of this whole story,
Here
then.
we go.
Okay. When Jim was around 9 years old, he began to claim to everyone that he had special powers. He would tell people that he could speak to these animals and bring them back to life. So, on multiple occasions, he would also climb people's roofs and tell them that he could fly before jumping off the roof, falling to the ground, and breaking bones. That's not something I recommend to anyone to do. I feel like we've maybe all, sometime in our life, thought we could fly of some sort. I don't know. Am I picking that up? Or I used to like
No, not
put
really.
really? Oh my God. I feel
No.
like my brother and I would like try to make wing things, but we wouldn't like jump off roofs. We would be like, go jump off this 4 foot like ledge. I don't know. No?
Yeah, no,
Oh,
I thought I was like part fish and I tried to, breathe underwater, but I never thought I could fly.
okay. Okay. You thought you were a mermaid. I thought I was a bird. It's fine.
And
Holly
I
was
was
the normal one.
nothing.
All right. Moving on. So Jim really thought like he could do anything or say anything, like having special powers, and that would make him popular. Unfortunately, it didn't. But in church, he saw from the churches he was going to that these pastors had powers to like help people, and people loved the pastors. And so he caught on to that and was like, that's me. That's what I want to do.
hmm
Jim Jones Sr. was a part of the Ku Klux Klan. Forgot to mention that little part.
His
So
dad.
his dad was in the KKK. So this actually is going, you'll see this come into factor, not the white supremacy part, but the fact that Jim Jones was actually so against white supremacy. That is something positive that you could take away from this whole story. So Jim had a really big issue with his dad because of this, not just because his dad was abusive and an awful human, but he was also really racist. Jim was very passionate about racial injustice his whole life and later on fought for race rights. And so this ended up being a huge reason why the two of them didn't get along. At some point, Jim's parents did separate, and Jim Jones moved with his mom to Richmond, Virginia. So Jim went on to graduate high school early with honors, and he ended up working at a local hospital doing like systems. So Jim met his future wife, Marceline Baldwin, in the hospitals, and the two of them got married in June of 1949. And as you guys will soon find out, the two of them had a very difficult and toxic marriage, but for some reason, Marceline stayed with Jim until the very end. And I put that lightly because it was literally until their end. Jim and Marceline ended up moving away from Virginia at some point, and they went back to Indiana. Don't know why. In Indiana, Marceline would work as a nurse while Jim attended Butler University. So at this point in like the 1950s, early 50s, Indiana was the heart of the KKK. And that pretty much pushed Jim to develop even more his passion for racial integration and socialism. So in 1952, Jim accepted a position as a student pastor at a Methodist church. And so what we know about this Methodist church that made it special and kind of particular is that it was Pentecostal. I don't know if you guys know the differences in churches and stuff like that, or the followers, but I'm just going to put it out there. So Pentecostal churches, depending on where you go, can be very animated. There can be dancing, there can be this heavy preaching from pastors. You can see miracles being performed. People are going to be dressed a little differently, etc. So, in fact, Pentecostalism is considered a movement within the Protestant Christianity, and it emphasizes in the gifts of like Holy Spirit. So, like the gifts, I mean, not like physical gifts, but like speaking in tongues, supernatural healings. They also abstain from drugs, alcohol, and like chewing tobacco and smoking tobacco.
And there's probably different levels of
Yeah, it
Pentecostal
depends.
too, and
But this church in particular that he started being a student pastor at was a very Pentecostal, like preaching to the heaviest, many followers and members. Like they lead on the pastor.
they're like traditional,
Very
very
traditional.
okay.
Yeah. It was a very animated church, and this church was known for doing faith healings. Now, we have all seen videos or heard of faith healings, and they are just something else. And I want to also say to anyone listening to this episode that is religious or faith believing, in no way am I trying to put anything down. You're always allowed to believe in whatever you want. But this in particular can be a little crazy. So I'm going to just continue on with the story. So Jim was quick to take note of these type of performances because they would gather more and more people into the church, and it would gain more and more attention for the pastor. So obviously Jim was like this antisocial, awkward kid. No, I mean, man, at this point had no friends. And so he was like, how can I be popular? I'm going to do faith healings. And so it didn't take too long after Jim started doing faith healings that he was invited to like preach and do healings at conventions like throughout Indiana and surrounding states. So by the mid 1950s, Jim was filling these churches up with like performance healing sermons. He would insist that congregations be completely racially integrated, which was huge. And that he also said Black members should sit up front in churches, which was another big thing. So the dude was like becoming popular in different ways. Okay, so now I'm going to have you guys watch a clip, but this is one of the faith healings that he's doing. It's a really long actual video, and I went through the whole thing because I was like, which faith healing should they watch? So go ahead and watch this.
Who's Willa Mae Conley? What a sensation about you. Did you once lose a loved one? I think the name of James.
Yes, that's my brother.
He was 14 years of age. And he was reading something, and someone asked him for what he had, and he didn't want to give it.
Yes,
and
he did.
that person shot him to death.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
I'm saying this to give you faith
Yes.
so that you can mount up, because you've been feeling pain here in the chest
Yes.
and in the back.
Yes.
And you injured your foot some time ago, and
Yes,
you've been
I
having
did.
constant pain in it, or you had to move around with a chair.
Yes, I did.
I do not know you, and you've told me or no one else the things I just mentioned.
No,
Is
you
that
sure
true?
haven't.
Now, where's your pain?
Don't feel it, dear.
I'm not going to hate on the people there and what they
Mm.
believe in.
Yeah,
But-
right.
For the listeners who can't see the video, after he asked the lady if she feels any more pain, I just couldn't stop laughing at the first thing she grabbed was her boobs.
Yes.
Yeah. No disrespect to people that believe, whatever you want to believe in. Obviously, no disrespect ever. But it's the difference between believing something and tricking people.
Yeah.
He's tricking people, and it's
Yeah.
dangerous. I'm surprised nobody got hurt from that. I'm
Yeah.
sure they did.
I think it's just predatory.
Yeah.
It's using and abusing.
Yeah.
So speaking of hurting people, I didn't play this one, but one of Jim Jones's most famous healings that's now like popular to watch on video. It was of this woman who had a broken leg, and her leg was broken. It was in a cast and everything. Jim brought her up on stage, and he was talking about how this woman had just broken her leg yesterday, and he puts his hands over her casts, and he's talking, and then he tells the woman, cut off the cast, and is basically like, get up and run. And so what does she do? She gets up and runs. And the whole congregation's like, what? They're like mind blown, going batshit crazy. They go nuts. Well, later on, like decades later, we find out this woman was actually drugged and knocked out, and they put a cast on her while she was knocked out. When she woke up, she had this cast on, and members of the church were telling her, oh my God, you were in an accident. You broke your leg. We already helped you. We put you the doctor put you in a cast. You need to like relax. Don't walk on it. Like you have a broken leg. So when Jim brought her up on stage and was like, take the cast off and run, she literally could because she never had a broken leg.
Wow. Other people are in on this trick.
Yes.
I feel like it would be easier to just find someone off the street and pay them a couple
Yes.
bucks to act like they
I
leg
totally
was
think
broken.
that's what they did. Oh, well, no. I think
Instead of
he totally
drugging.
no, they drugged members of the congregation because then they wanted her to go around and be like, look what he did. He healed my broken leg. But she was told she was in an accident. So it's not like she remembered it anyways, you
And
know?
this is probably like somebody that they know, someone they trust,
Yes.
the congregation, like not just some random person that's like, hey guys, I'm here to put on a show, you know?
And like a lot of people bought into this. A lot of people
Yeah.
bought into faith healings.
I mean, I could see,
Dude, if you did some like, I mean, don't get me wrong, but sometimes I see magic stuff and I'm like, excuse me? And so think of that like 70 years ago. I would have been like, wow, take all my money, you know, like I'm in. I totally would have been in a cult 70 years, you know, like I would have been like, yes, you've tricked me. I'm in.
Yeah, and for these people,
Hopefully
these poor
not this
people that
cult.
are suffering from like ailments, whatever, you know,
They
it's sad
believe.
they put their faith in people like this.
And so faith healings is, honest to God, what made Jim Jones popular. But at some point, of course, because of the timeline of history, Jim faced heavy discrimination for allowing racial integration in his church. So he ended up having to leave the Methodist church. And that's when he decided that he was going to create his own. So that's where this all comes into play. So when he first created his own church, it was called the Community Unity Church. That's a little bit of a mouthful. So then he soon renamed it to the Wings of Deliverance. That's also, it sounds like a biker gang. So then in 1955, he said it's going to be called the Temple Gospel Church. But now get this. This is nuts. I didn't know this part at all. This was something I read for the first time and I was like, excuse me. In order to raise money for his church to like build it and stuff, Jim went door to door as a salesman. And that's like normal back then, right? Yeah, he wasn't a normal salesman. He sold monkeys.
That's a hard market, I feel like.
You heard me right. Like imagine hard market. Imagine some guy just comes to your door and is like, hello, sir, ma'am, would you like a monkey? And he literally had monkeys with him. Like, not only is that weird, but where the hell was he getting monkeys from?
Dude,
Also-
to be honest, I actually feel like I know some people that would buy a monkey from somebody.
100%. But where did he get
You
the
have a
monkey
related
from? Like,
Like on a whim, just shows up at your doorstep, no research, no supplies. Are you going to buy a monkey?
I think my dad would for sure.
I
Your
was gonna
dad
say,
would.
I was gonna say, Holly, your dad would, and
Yeah.
Kylie, I swear to God, you probably would too.
Well, just because I would
Yeah.
feel bad that the monkey is with
If
this
it came with a
person.
little baby monkey and it was on his shoulder and
Yeah.
he was like, "Look at this no baby monkey," you'd be like, "Can I have the monkey?"
If the monkey had a little T-shirt on, I would
Oh
buy
my
the
God.
monkey.
Yeah,
That's great. Yeah, I didn't even want my dad to see Tiger King because he would take it as inspiration and not comedy. So
Your dad could have been the good Tiger King.
the good Tiger
Like
King.
I 100% could see that.
Yeah.
I would have bought tickets to go to his sanctuary.
Yeah. He's still got a chance. I mean, he still might do it.
Maybe
Yeah.
we should crowdfund for this to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, it'd be
Well,
a good cause.
We'll put on a movie premiere because he probably hasn't seen Tiger King. Well, maybe he's seen it by now.
No,
but-
he hasn't seen it. I've made sure he hasn't.
Okay. Yeah. Anyways, off top. So yeah, all of it's concerning. The monkeys, the door-to-door, the new church, whatever. So moving on. Throughout the 1960s, Jim and his wife, Marceline, they ended up adopting multiple children. But
Boy.
as usual in this scenario of his whole racial integration thing, none of them were right. None of them were right kids. What led Jim to describe his family out there as like, he said they were the rainbow family. And that was like another thing that made him popular is he didn't adopt a single Caucasian child.
Angelina Jolie?
The OG
Mm.
in a bad way. Yes, in a bad way. And it made him popular with everyone. So like, people questioned, did he ever want to have kids, or was this all like part of his whole viewpoint to like get popular, get more followers, blah, blah, blah. So
Yeah.
at one point, probably At one point, the Joneses adopted 3 Korean American children. They were named Lou, Suzanne, and Stephanie. They went on to later adopt a Native American girl named Agnes. And then at some point, they ended up having one biological child of their own as well. So after a few years of having these children in Jim's life, Jim, out of nowhere, literally out of nowhere, started becoming very obsessed with the idea of a nuclear holocaust. It was just like he was the conspiracy theorist of all theorists. He just like one day was like, oh my God, nuclear holocaust. And in 1961, Jim announced to his entire congregation that this idea of a nuclear holocaust was impending. I was to his entire congregation that he had a dream, and that in this dream, the entire Midwest of the US was going to be destroyed by a nuclear holocaust. So, just as a side note, at this exact same time in his life, Jim was also experimenting with drugs. Coincidence? I think so.
Not.
No, I think so. I think it was a coincidence. After this dream, Jim also started describing himself as a prophet and telling everybody that he could tell the future. So, put a lot of things together. Unfortunately, what happened is that a few months after this Holocaust dream occurred, an article came out in the New York Times that said something along the lines of Brazil was going to be one of the safest places in the world to live in case there was a nuclear warfare, which why did this article come out at the same time? I don't know. But of course, Jim went batshit crazy when he saw this article, and he decided, you know what? I'm going to move my family to Brazil just to be safe. Jim took his family and they ended up moving to Brazil for 2 years. On their way there, the family stopped in a state of South America called Guyana. This was just like a place that on their way to Brazil, this is where they ended up at some point. And so they were there for like a few days before continuing it on.
So is he just making all of his money now from just like scamming people and being a prophet?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Maybe we should start scamming people so we can move to Brazil.
Okay. So he went to Guyana on his way to Brazil. They ended up in Rio de Janeiro. The Joneses ended up living in Rio for about 2 years, where they helped people build homes for the poor and they preached gospel to everybody on the street. So it doesn't sound too bad. But Jim ultimately, for some reason, decided to move his family back to the States. So in December of 1963, Jim decided to make plans to move his church to Northern California because he thought it was going to be safer if he could get everybody to move to the West Coast. Because Jim Jones he had such devoted church members, in the summer of 1964, the Jones family and about 140 members of the church moved out of their town and moved to the Redwood Valley of San Francisco. Imagine just having enough people love you to completely move halfway across the United States.
I couldn't get you and Kylie to move back to Arkansas for me.
Nope.
We can't get you to move to Florida. Why do all the cults end up in California or on the West Coast, like Washington, Oregon?
It's true.
Waco.
It's gotta be land, right?
Waco.
Yeah. Besides Waco.
It's land, right? That's what I would assume.
Well, it's so expensive out there.
Yeah.
It wasn't back then.
That's
right?
true.
Yeah. So they moved to the Redwood Valley of San Fran. And over the next few months after the move, Jim would hold church services by renting out old church buildings in different places. And then he ended up having these services on a ranch at Ridgewood, which is a place that they built. And in order to make more income so that his church could thrive, during the weekdays, Jim was actually a high school teacher. And then on the weekend, he was a preacher. Would have been nuts to have him as a high school teacher. I just imagine, I couldn't figure out what he taught, but I imagine it's social studies, or history.
Like the crazy psychology teacher or something.
Yeah. Something fun where he probably just bullshitted everything.
Well, he doesn't believe in science. So it's not that.
That's true. Yeah.
And art's not bullshit. I just meant
Yeah.
Backtracking.
Yeah.
Well, I said art, and at the same time, Kate goes something that's bullshit, and then I was like, oh great, I'm gonna get thrown under the bus on YouTube some more.
Yeah.
Again.
Everybody needs to boycott Holly. Yeah. So after about 3 years of continuously building up the membership to his church, The now called People's Temple was officially granted standing by the Christian Church of Disciples of Christ in the late 1960s. So the following February, the People's Temple Redwood Valley Complex was officially opened. The compound also held the Joneses' house on the property, but other than the family home, the compound had a large swimming pool, a child care center, an elder home, a temple, and was a ranch. So it was pretty much like they created their own little world out there in the Redwood Valley. Shortly after the ranch, which is what I'm just going to call it, opened, Jim began having his first affair. And I say first because Jim would later become known to having been in multiple relationships. And this was kind of a norm for him, to the point where like nobody ever called him out about it. Nobody really had issues with it. And like I said, Jim always referred to himself as a prophet. And because he was the pastor of his church, people really were like, this is how it's supposed to be.
Even his wife had no problem with it?
Well, she stayed until the end. So, I mean, I can't assume that she enjoyed it, but she stayed, so
I
can't speak for her. But within a year of the ranch being opened, the People's Temple decided they were going to expand their membership into the city limits of San Fran. So in San Fran, Jim was able to purchase, like, for some reason, now this is so weird too, they purchased 5 to 6 Greyhound buses. Don't know where this money is coming from. I mean, we do know where the money coming from, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But after purchasing these buses, Jim and his members would like ride around on these buses throughout different towns, and they would literally talk to people on the street about the People's Temple. And if the people were like into it, they were like, yeah, I want to be a part of that. They would literally just be like, well, hop on, come to our ranch, and then just live at the ranch forever. Like they would just it's basically, they just like took people on the bus and were like, you're never going back.
What is going on in your life that you're like, yep?
Yeah, I just immediately think homeless people, like that's like a certain demographic, or area.
That's fair. Maybe if they're homeless or having a rough time, I get that.
I'd be like, hell yeah, free place to stay, sure, free food, absolutely.
If you catch me the right day and time, I might just jump on.
Yeah. And surprisingly or not, this worked. They got a lot of people from off the streets on these freaking Greyhound buses. The People's Temple really started to gain expansion and exposure during the 1970s, which came along with a lot of media coverage as well. So there were several series of articles that came out in San Fran that profiled the temple and Jim Jones as a false messiah. He was a false messiah who claimed to have brought 43 people back from the dead. So these articles also dug deep into how Jones created his church with this like crazy power structure, and that everything led back to him. And ultimately, he thought he had godlike powers among his members. And so after these articles were released, obviously Jim was like really upset. And that's when he just started really despising the media. He like thought the media was his number one enemy. And he would often even state that the media was a, quote, agent of the devil. At one point in 1973, 8 members of the People's Temple decided they wanted out. They didn't want to be in it anymore. So they left. And those 8 people ended up talking to different media sources, and word got out that there was like financial abuse within the People's Temple, along with mind control, sex abuse, tax evasion. So Jim took this media coverage and members leaving really harshly, and he began speaking to his members about like this revolutionary like killing or this passionate suicide pact. And of course, everyone was like, wait, what the fuck? Like, what? This came out of nowhere. What do you mean? Like, everybody was like, this is super drastic. We don't need to do this. But if that's what you want, like, we'll listen to you, but we ain't going to do it. This is the first time he talked about it, which like, imagine someone, your pastor at church is just like, what do you guys think about like dying together? And I'd be like, well, that's where I leave.
You go first.
Yeah, I'll see you do it first. Yeah. After those members left in 1973, Jim made the decision to relocate the entirety of the People's Temple to South America, so that they could be in the safest place possible. Well, instead of going back to Brazil, he decided that they were going to go to Guyana. On their journey to Brazil, they stopped in Guyana for a few days in this place called Jonestown. And Jim and his family really loved this place in Georgetown. It was like a colony that they thought everybody was nice. There was lots of land. And Jim kept it in the back of his head like, this is a place I could move my church to and congregation to, and people will come. But in reality, Jim was moving everything out of the country because of all the shit that he was getting in the US from the media and government. So Jim really felt like there was not going to be a possibility of them staying in the United States. So he was like, we got to get out of here. So at some point, Jim went to Guyana and began having negotiations with their government to purchase 27,000 acres of land.
Wow.
And I'm like, nuts. Where are you getting that money? So the land he was looking at was on the Venezuelan border. The first of the People's Temple members arrived in Guyana in March of 1974. They basically became like, they started the extreme task that I would absolutely not want of clearing the jungle, because at this point, Guyana, or the place that they're looking at in Guyana outside of Georgetown, is just straight up jungle. They were breaking ground on construction. So it was going to be a place called the Promised Land, which is what Jim's telling all of his members, like, hey, we're breaking ground in the Promised Land over in South America. Like, this is going to be it. We all have to go there. He would later name this area Jonestown. So it's outside of a place called Georgetown. It's just land. It's not a town. And he was like, you know what? I'm going to take my last name and I'm going to make it Jonestown. So a year later, 50 temple members were over there living in Jonestown. And in 1977, it became an established community, and everything in the US was just getting worse. I don't know why this happened, but on Memorial Day in 1977, along with 600 members of the People's Temple, Jim Jones decided to make an in-person appearance for the first time in a long time. During this appearance, it was like for the Golden Gate Bridge Foundation of something. He gave a public speech and he stated, quote, I'm in a suicidal mood today. So this is why I have great personal empathy for everyone, end quote. Like, in the middle of a speech, it's just like, I'm suicidal. I have empathy for everybody. That's it. All right. See you later. You know, like, what I'd be like, okay, this dude's nuts.
Do we think he's, I don't know,
Suicidal?
schizophrenic or just like a narcissist?
Not schizo, but I think, well, he's
Paranoid?
He's
I don't know.
paranoid. He thinks other people are out to get him, which they kind of are because he's doing weird shit. But he also thinks like the nuclear holocaust is coming, and then an article comes out that the nuclear holocaust is coming. And so he's like, I'm right. Oh my God. Like, I think he does believe he was a prophet.
I mean, I knew this, but I'm kind of just noticing the fact that he, must believe what the things that he's saying, because he believed it enough to also go on to commit.
But like, honestly, like he's got to believe in something enough.
Yeah.
After this whole public speaking happened, a few days later, an article came out alleging that some of the members of the People's Temple had been beaten, and that the church was also in significant debt from financial mishandlings. This article went on to speak about how Jim was being accused of drugging his members and beating them. And according to the article, this is great. According to the article, an unnamed member who had left the temple spoke about how Jim would have these private meetings once a month with some of the group members. And during these meetings, they would all sit in a circle on the ground, which is like cult, and they would talk shit about other people in the organization. And like, they would ask, like, who do you think's a spy? Who do you think's going to leave the temple? And then the next day, there would be multiple beatings happening on members who were named in those meetings. Okay. So like you're in a circle and someone's like, Kylie's a spy. The next day, Kylie would get the shit beat out of her. Like, it's just, it's crazy ritual behavior. At one point, this unnamed member also stated that there were a few meetings where members were actually dragged into the middle of the circle and, quote, unspeakable actions took place, end quote. So like, you can just use your imagination. By the time that this article made the newsstands, Jim Jones and about 1,000 of his members were on their way to Jonestown in Guyana, which left only about 50 People's Temple members back in the US to keep up with their compounds there. So when these people left their homes and families in the US and headed towards the AKA Promised Land, they were honestly expecting like this paradise in the jungle. They assumed it was going to be like this cool hippie commune where everybody'd have their own homes and they would farm for their food, etc. But when they got there, they quickly noticed how different it was going to be. So like Jim was having like 16 people to a house living together, and the houses fit like 4 people, and they were literally shacks. So multiple families were living together due to space. There was like no water, no electricity. When they entered onto the Jonestown property, they were also forced to get rid of any personal belongings they had with them. They were told that they didn't need these possessions to live like on the promised land, to live like a great life. But in reality, they didn't have room for any of the possessions to be kept on the land. Even though they bought so many acres of land, it was such like there was no structure. Like there were structures, but it was just it was hand done. Like there wasn't room for shit, you know? So
It was a shanty town.
it was a shanty town. But regardless of that, the first few months, everything seemed to go well. There's videos out there from Jonestown early on where like people are dancing together, they're cooking food, they're playing games. There's tons of kids just running around. In fact, there was over 300 kids on the Jonestown property. I mean, when the members moved to Guyana, they literally brought everybody with them. So like if the mom was a part of the People's Temple and they were like, Jim was like, come to the Promised Land, the mom was like, all right, I'm coming with my husband and my 4 kids. You know, like they brought everyone with them. Back in California at this same time, former members of the People's Temple were starting to actually plan attacks on the church. So, for example, there was a woman who had a child with Jim Jones, and she was back in the US. She ended up suing Jim for custody of this kid because he took the kid with him to Guyana. Like he illegally just like took the child and left the mom back. Jim refused to give the child up. Jim publicly stated that any attempt to take the child away would, quote, put the life of every member of the People's Temple into jeopardy, end quote. So that's a threat.
Mm-hmm.
There ended up being 6 former members who came forward to sue Jim for the custody of their children that were with him in Jonestown. So like he had lots of baby mamas and children, but he took all the children with him. At some point, these former members also declared a human rights violation against the People's Temple, stating that when they were in the congregation, there was also assertion during the rehearsals that a mass suicide was going to take place. After this violation was leaked to the press, multiple People's Temple's family members in the United States began to claim that Jonestown was kind of a concentration camp and not so much a commune. They stated that there was armed guards, which there was brainwashing, which there was, forced labor, sexual abuse, and sleep deprivation among its members. It's all of it true. That all of this control Jim had over his members was due to mind-altering drugs that he would often give to his members without knowledge, basically. Like he would drug them, which
And
we
what
saw.
was he doing? And he was doing that.
And he was doing this.
Okay.
And this is something we saw like in his earlier faith healing stuff as well.
Mm-hmm.
He most of the time they were being drugged. They weren't purposefully taking the drugs.
Yeah.
According to an article that came out from the New York Times, Jim had been administering things like Quaaludes, Dermarol, Valium, and morphine to his members without their knowledge, which is
Riley's trying to think about how to join.
Yeah.
I was literally just thinking, I wish I grew up in a time when Quaaludes were around. It seems like a
Just
good
like a
time.
normal thing. Yeah.
Like the Wolf of Wall Street, it seemed like he was having a great time on them.
That's absolutely nuts. Okay.
I'll cut that part out.
Yeah. Jim also had over 11,000 doses on his personnel of Thorazine. Jim also had in his possession over 11,000 doses of a drug called Thorazine. This is a drug that was used to calm people with mental issues. So like he was just drugging up people.
Where did he get all of these?
Yeah.
I will get into that.
Okay, good.
At some point, Jim realized that in order to keep his members in Jonestown with him because of like the shitty conditions and stuff, he would constantly need to get them to feed into his lies and believe that he was like, in fact, this all powerful man. So there was one time that during one of his church services at Jonestown, there was like this potluck dinner that they were having all together. And Jim paid someone to show up with a gun at the dinner and shoot him. Well, they shot him with a blank on purpose. So obviously, if you get shot with a blank, like you're still bleeding, you still got shot. He basically pretended that he had been shot in front of everyone. People freaked out. Jim was able to like magically heal himself, you know, because he didn't really get shot. And so it was like magic. People in his congregation believed everything. And they were like, wow, he can even do miracles on himself. So he really he was like, I got to do everything I can to make these people stay. Obviously, back in the US, former members are pushing at the US government to like come investigate Jonestown and the People's Temple or do something. So eventually, a congressman of all people stepped up and was like, I'm going to investigate Jonestown. So the congressman was Leo Ryan from Northern California. Don't know. I don't understand where he came in. Like, why is the FBI or the police not involved? Like, why is a congressman involved? Don't understand. Do you know?
I mean, theory is that you have all these complaints about the former members and like the baby mamas. And he's a congressman from Northern California.
Yeah.
I'm sure he was getting a lot of them showing up saying, hey, do something.
Yes. But he took it into his own hands.
Oh, I guess because he couldn't get the FBI or anybody else to investigate.
So he was like, it's up to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or I'll get some votes out of this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Congressman Ryan decided that in order to get down to like the bottom of things, in order to investigate the People's Temple in Jonestown, he would need to personally go to Jonestown. So with a group of reporters, some of the temple family members, Congressman Ryan and them flew into Georgetown Airport in November of 1978, and they made their way into the jungle of Jonestown. Of course, as soon as Jim Jones heard that the congressman was coming, he like prepared his members for their arrival. They practiced for days and weeks about how they were like going to act, how they were going to eat, what activities they were going to do. Basically, it was like a production was going to be put on for the congressman and these people.
Yeah, he's like act normal.
Yes, like if your leader is telling you like this is what we need to do, like put on a production, I'd be like, wow, this is some shit.
Yeah, you don't
know?
go
Like,
tell restaurants when you're gonna come in and like check their sanitary conditions.
right? Like
They're gonna clean it up.
yeah,
This is like North Korea with their like
it is
stage
yeah.
tours. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, like don't look here.
So once Congressman Ryan and his group made it onto the Jonestown property, they were greeted like very warmly, and they ended up having this nice welcome dinner with all of the members and Jim Jones. Well, the congressmen seemed to really be impressed with the organization, obviously, because they're putting on this show for him. But later that night, like the same night they arrived, one of the reporters was secretly passed a note from one of the temple members, and it said that he wanted to leave with them and go back to the US. The reporter gave the congressman the note the next morning, and then get this shit. Congressman Ryan went to Jim Jones about the note. Like what the hell, dude?
Tattletale? What?
Yeah, you little tattletale. Well,
Snitch.
yeah, we can't be too mean because you'll see, but we can't be too mean. But
Okay.
I don't know why Congressman Ryan would be like, I've got this secret note, Jim. Like, what the hell is this all about? This dude wants to leave. Of course, Jim's response was, well, that person can leave if he wants. Like anyone's allowed to leave, which we obviously know is untrue. We know this is untrue because at the time, Jim Jones had made an agreement with the Guyanese officials that allowed the People's Temple permission to import certain things duty-free. So at this moment, Jim Jones and his congregation were allowed to import anything they wanted into Jonestown duty-free. So that allowed them to bring in things like drugs, things like firearms through the Guyanese customs with no one asking any questions. What? So remember how we talked about all the meds and drugs they had? It was never questioned why they were being in Jonestown because Jim Jones somehow like made this affiliation with the government of them just allowing them to have whatever they want. He was really good at persuading people.
religious organization maybe and like trying to
Yeah.
oh, that's crazy.
But of course, they were probably like, oh, we need bath towels. But in reality, it's like AK-47s in a box, you know?
Yeah. Pills wrapped in bath towels.
We're a Quaalude church.
Right.
Don't
We
discriminate
believe
against
in the
us.
Quaaludes. Yes. Don't ask us why. So obviously, this allowed Jim to have Jonestown literally bordered and patrolled by guards who were members, and they were all heavily armed. So, like, in return, this symbolically told the members that no, you can't leave. If you try to leave, there's guards there with guns. So, like, it was never questioned, but obviously, people didn't feel comfortable enough trying to leave.
Yeah, well, they're probably like posing as like, oh, it's security for us, but really they're keeping them in, not keeping other people out.
Right. And so
Yeah.
people didn't try to leave, you know, like, or maybe they did and we just don't know because
Mhm.
they're not here to tell us, you know? So after speaking with Congressman Ryan about this note, Jim Jones went to his members and stated publicly in front of the congressman and his group that if anyone at Jonestown no longer wanted to be there, they could leave. And so over that weekend, more and more people came forward asking to leave. And on the second day of the congressman's visits, one of the temple members actually ended up lunging at the congressman with a knife and attempted to cut his throat. Of course, absolutely freaking out. The congressman was like, what? Nope, I'm out. That's it.
Yeah.
Like, I got this weird note. People want to leave. Someone just tried to kill me. And honestly, it started to freak out like a lot of the members too. They were like, what the hell is happening? People are leaving. Violence is happening. On November 18th, 1978, the congressman's party left to head back to their plane to go back to the US. And they left with a total of 14 members of the People's Temple that were like, we got to get out of here. Of course, at that time, Jim Jones is trying to keep calm and be like, no, this is okay. You leave if you want. Like, it's fine. But in reality, shit was hitting the fan. So Jim was wigging out, absolutely going crazy, knowing that these people, these 14 members, basically he thought, which they probably were, but he thought these members were going to go back to the US and like rat out everything, which they probably would have anyways. So Jim decides that this is the big moment. This is ultimately a major decision that leads Jonestown and its peoples to its demise. So Congressman Ryan and his party of reporters, Temple family members, and former Temple members get into their trucks in Jonestown and drive back to the local airstrip to board their plane to take them back to the US. As they exit their cars and walk onto the plane, a bus of the People's Temple members drive up behind them, armed with guns, and begin shooting. So tune in next week to hear part 2 of this story. I am
something like that.
So this is part 1. Next week is part 2. I wanted to leave you guys on a little bit of a cliffhanger. That's the story of the People's Temple and what is going to be known as the Jonestown Massacre. So listen in next week to hear part 2. Bye.
No comments? Just bye?
Comments, questions.
Bye.
That's it for me, ladies. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean,
So, it's a story. You have to build up to it, you know?
For sure. And I think that I think it's really good because a lot of times it just starts off at the ranch, you know, you don't hear like his background, Jim's background and history and family history. So I really think that's really interesting.
A lot to digest.
It's a lot to digest. And just get ready because shit is hitting the fan as we speak, but it's about to get a lot worse, obviously.
Yeah.
Like the cliffhanger is, you know, this congressman who is like, oh my God, I thought everything was great. Not only have I been threatened with violence, people are trying to leave with us. We got to get out of here. And they're on their way. They're like walking up to this plane and this bus comes behind them, probably one of the Greyhound buses, who knows?
Mhm.
And I don't know. They probably didn't ship that over to Guyana, but I just imagine it being a Greyhound bus. Pulls up and these people just get out and start shooting at them. You know, like that's just absolutely mind blowing.
Yeah.
They weren't like armed or anything. Like it's just the congressmen and reporters. Like congressmen don't have like Secret Service back then, right?
No, nope.
No.
Nobody was armed. Nobody was armed except for this bus coming up and they just open fired.
Yikes.
Dang.
Yeah.
It was a long, long time ago. A documentary I watched on it talked about you were talking about him, being accepting of like allowing Black people into the church and like pro integration,
Mhm.
about how it was kind of all a ploy to like gain members of his church and to prey on like Black people.
Mm.
I didn't talk about it. I read some articles about it, but
Yeah.
it's hard to talk about that because there's a lot of things that were like he actually was into racial integration, but then if you look at it, if you guys go further into the PowerPoint, you're going to see lots of dead bodies, and a lot of them are Black people. And so it's like the People's Temple was a majority, I think it was like 60 to 70% Black. And so then people came at him and they were like, wait, are you just trying to kill Black people? Like, what's happening here? Like what happened here?
That's why it's hard to tell
Yeah.
his true motive because he's a crazy person.
Yeah.
Well, the motive doesn't even make sense, right? Like, I mean, back to him opening fire on, the congressman and stuff. If his like whole thing is that we don't want this to get back to, what we're doing here to get back to everybody else. Well, having a shooting of a congressman is not going to keep your place from getting torn apart,
I think he was like,
you just wait, Holly. You just wait.
Shit hit the fan kind of moment, and it was like
Yeah.
a desperate, okay,
Yeah.
all or
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah, for sure.
And we will see it in part 2, but of those who know the story, shit hitting the fan with shooting at the congressman and the people is just the beginning of that day.
Yep.
And so that's all I'm going to say.
And we'll see you next week.
And we'll see you next week.
And we'll see. Yeah.
And with that, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. If you want even more information, including photos of the case, you can check us out on overmydeadpod.com. Be sure to leave us a review wherever you're listening to this, and check us out on social media at Over My Dead Pod. We will see you next week with part 2. See ya. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.